Welcome back. Now we answer questions we receive from you, our viewers. If you have a question, visit our website, QuranSpeaks.com. Dr. Shabir, the question is, how do we regard the Sanaa manuscript? Is it pre-Uthmanic?
Okay.
Lots to unpack.
Yes. So let me start by unpacking it by mention Uthmanic, what was meant by Uthmanic. So Uthman was the third caliph in the history of Islam, and that means that after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died, the prophecy ceased with him, but there still was a need for a ruler and a leader among the Muslims who would serve both as a religious guide and also to look after the temporal affairs. So first came Abu Bakr, a close companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him, then Omar, second caliph, and third, Uthman, the caliph. Now, in Abu Bakr's time, it was recognized that the Prophet, peace be upon him, died without leaving the Quran in a collected volume. People had memorized the Quran in the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and many more had heard him preach. So they knew the contents of the book, but they did not have a physical copy from the hand of the Prophet, peace be upon him. In fact, Islamic tradition says that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not trained to read or write. So he had scribes writing down the revelation for him. One of the scribes is known as Zayd, a young man, Zayd bin Thabit. Abu Bakr is said to have commissioned him to go around and collect the Quran from the written pieces in the possessions of various individuals, whoever had written them down in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And they had written the Quran on diverse materials like the barks of trees, smooth stones, and so on. So Zayd went around, and apparently he didn't just collect all of the written pieces and put them in a box, but rather he transcribed from those pieces of writings onto sheets that were then put together as a collection of sheets called suhuf. So this is like you might say a book in a rudimentary form. It's not bound yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kept in the possession of Abu Bakr, and then eventually passed on to Omar, the second caliph, and then to Omar's daughter, because he died suddenly before the third caliph can be instituted. And it remained in her possession. Then the third caliph came into power, and eventually in his time, he decided to make copies of that original document and have the copies sent to various parts of the Muslim empire. At least 4 copies are agreed upon, sent to various Muslim learning centers, and one kept in his own hometown in Medina. And some reports say even more copies than these. But the idea is that now this was the dissemination. So we can think of a 2-stage approach where first there is the collection of the manuscript in the time of Abu Bakr, and then a decade or so later, the publication of this document so that it's widespread. Mm-hmm. So now, the copies that were sent out by Uthman, these are referred to as the Uthmanic copies, or more generally as the Uthmanic manuscript, because it's handwritten, it's called a manuscript. And the Islamic tradition follows from that very closely. So basically, all copies of the Quran that have been found over the centuries and studied have all proven to be copies of those original copies that were sent out by Uthman. So they're all Uthmanic copies, except for one. In 1972, a mosque was being repaired in Sanaa in Yemen, and it was found that in the ceiling of the mosque, there were many old documents stashed. And among the documents, some were Quranic copies, and there was one of particular interest that came to be widely referred to now as the Sanaa palimpsest. Why is it called a palimpsest? A palimpsest, well, you know this. It's it's an erased manuscript. So somebody had a manuscript. They wrote on it, then erased it and wrote something else over it. So this particular palimpsest had a copy of the Quran written, apparently a copy of the Quran. That was erased, and then a new copy of the Quran was written over it. Now, the new copy, which is referred to as the upper level or the upper layer of this text, that corresponds closely to what we're reading today as an Uthmanic copy, a copy of the Uthmanic codices. The lower text shows some significant variations, not so significant as to challenge any of the things that Muslims practice or even what we believe. So no severe effect or major effect on the Muslim practices, and no effect on Muslim belief. But nonetheless, there are variations of words, and sometimes the sequence of a verse, is interchanged there. And the sequence of surahs, chapters, instead of going with the sequence that we have now in our documents, commonly known as the Quran. So that became of keen interest to academia because academics want to know the history and origins of things. They want to trace developments over time. They want to see changes and evolution and so on. So that became of keen interest to them. But largely Muslims have not had much reason from a religious point of view to be bothered by this because it's not like it challenges anything that we believe or nor does it upset any of the practices that we're accustomed to as Islamic practices.
So I guess the question still stands, right? Like, how is it possible that there was this manuscript there, right, palimpsest, as you mentioned, when Uthman is purported to have sent out all of these manuscripts that were the official ones to different parts of the world?
Yes. So one answer to this is that this is probably pre-Uthmanic in that before Uthman made this, the copies of that document, which was with Abu Bakr, other companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, could have been compiling their own copies as well. So remember we said that Abu Bakr, who I will now point out, lived on only 2 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So he had that original collection done within the 2 years of his caliphate. And then and Omar was in vogue for 10 years. And then came Uthman. So within the 10 years of Omar's time, you can well imagine that other companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, not having access to that original document, which was only there for safekeeping in the time of Omar, of the first caliph, of Abu Bakr, others could have gone out and made their own collection as well. Just as Zayd bin Thabit went around and consulted other people and said, okay, show me your copy there, or you got that flat stone, let me see what's written, and he writes it down. Other companions could have done the same thing as well. Or they could have written from their own memories because they were there alive with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, hearing him preach, sitting in his circles, getting the Quran dictated from him as well. So whatever they have written down, either from their own personal dictation from the mouth of the Prophet, peace be upon him, or by consulting other companions or hearing public preachings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and then going home and writing down what they remember from that public preaching. So many other companions could have had their own codices during this period of time. And so we have codices mentioned, a codex of Ibn Masud, and a codex of Ubay bin Ka'b, and many other companions as well.
Okay.
So that's how we could have a codex which is pre-Uthmanic, and that could be at variance with the Uthmanic codex. And then once Uthman has this publicized, then Muslims naturally fell in place and copied that because they knew that this was an official document, not done by one person, but done under the aegis of the caliph, with a whole apparatus and the wherewithal to make sure that we are publishing a document that accurately represents the preaching of our prophet some decades ago.
So the upper level of the text, was that also dated by scholars?
So scholars can only date the parchment.
Oh, okay.
And by dating the parchment, we are finding out when the animals from whose skin the parchment is made was alive.
Okay.
So it was found that this parchment must have been produced within a couple of decades after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So this could very well be a codex belonging to one of the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And so we wouldn't know the date of the upper layer of the text so much, but we would know the date of the creation of the parchment. And we could assume that, parchments were expensive to produce, and a whole flock of animals had to be killed, perhaps a couple of hundred animals to make enough, to give you enough skin to write the Quran, because the text was written very in large font in those days, and it took many skins to write the whole text. So you wouldn't just go to your local stationery store and buy from the stock of parchment that they had there. So people produced the parchment for the specific purpose of writing a document. So if we know when the animals died, we know basically when the document was first written. So that was within a couple of decades after the death of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So probably in the time of Uthman, or close to his time, and definitely within the lifetime of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And so that becomes a different witness, though with some variations, to what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, preached. And so we have not only the Uthmanic manuscripts, but if scholars were wondering, and they have wondered, like what else is there? Like, did something else get suppressed that we would like to know about?
Mm-hmm.
Well, here this comes, as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, this cuts away at the sense of complacency that many Muslims have gone around with, thinking that everything has been preserved, dot for dot, letter for letter, the way it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with no variation or change whatsoever. So that it cuts at that general sense, which actually is not a scholarly way of thinking about the Quran. Our scholars have always known and have always described in our classical books variations and manuscripts, like it's read like this by Ubay bin Ka'b, it's read like this by Ibn Masud, and so on. And in the Codex of Ibn Masud, it was seen to be written like this. In the Codex of Ubay bin Ka'b, it was seen to be written like this with this or that variation. So these were always known in scholarly circles to have existed, but recently, average Muslims have just simply, without bothering to learn, they have just simply parroted a common way of speaking about the Quran and saying, it's 100% the way it's always been, and they cannot imagine any variation. So in the one way, it cuts against that, but on the other hand, it removes that scholarly suspicion which was there. Like in academia, there was always a suspicion, we would really like to find a pre-Uthmanic Quran. We would like to see what was there before Uthman suppressed it all and gave us the one copy which everybody has been running around with now. So now we have found it, and now the skeleton is out of the closet. We can see that it's not something to be feared. It's like a kid looking under the bed and realizing there's no monster there. So this Sanaa palimpsest in a unique way validates the Islamic tradition. It shows that we have not suppressed anything. Maybe this Sanaa palimpsest was compiled by a companion without the proper rigorous methods that were used by Zayd bin Thabit and the committee that worked with him, and the diligence that they could have exercised, because they had the state backing. They had the funding. Every scholar nowadays knows that you need funding to carry out your research. And scholars are human beings. They cannot work without some without some financial support. So Zayd and his team had the support of the ruling caliph, and they could do it in a very systematic and rigorous manner. But individuals left to their own, might be doing it well one day and the other day not so well. So we have in something like the Sanaa palimpsest, probably that mixture of good and not so good scholarly work in producing that document. And Asma Hilali has actually done a careful study of this and published it in a book with the name The Sanaa Palimpsest, with her as author, in which she has transcribed the whole, the legible parts of the palimpsest, and she has shown where the variations lie. And she has pointed out some ways in which this might have been a document that was not produced as a scholarly document. Perhaps it was produced by a student within a madrasa setting, within a school setting in which the student is taking notes. Now, the jury is out on that theory of Asma Hilali, but nonetheless, that she could advance such a theory shows something about the obscure origins of that Sanaa palimpsest. And at the same time, it shows that the skeleton is out of the closet, and there is nothing to worry about. There's nothing to fear. There is no zombie under the bed.
So can we feel confident then that the Quran that we have now is preserved accurately from God?
Yes, we could say, with confidence that the Quran, that as we have it now, the Uthmanic Quran, this was produced in the lifetime of the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, with scholarly scrutiny, as their best representation of what they knew collectively as the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had preached in their presence. By comparison, just to give context, it would be like saying, we have a copy of the gospel that Jesus preached that was verified by the senior companions of the Prophet Jesus, his disciples and apostles, such like Peter, James, and John. And they agreed that this is the gospel as Jesus preached it. So when we have this now in the Quranic context, we have it that Zayd bin Thabit, who was a scribe of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and a close companion, writing under the aegis of the Caliph Uthman, at the time when Ali, who would be the fourth Caliph, is still alive, and so many companions and wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the mother of the believers, Aisha, is still alive, and so on. So these are all people who lived and walked with the Prophet. They knew what he preached, and they would not allow something fake to be foisted as a Quran that he preached. And in their time and under their strict supervision, this document becomes published as the Quran, and it is not contested. So we have full confidence that this is the revelation that God has sent to his Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Dr. Shabir, that was a wonderful question and a fascinating answer. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Our videos reach people all over the world. We hope you will seize the opportunity to share in the reward from God. Please support us today.